Andrew Bradley's response. Who's concerned about this?
All right, we are live on YouTube. This is the March 1st, 2022 meeting of the Node.js Loaders team. The agenda today is the Ambient Loader proposal from Mael. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Okay. And that's all that's on the agenda today. So yeah, but I guess before we get into the meat of it, I'd love to merge in that PR. Like just simply merging it in doesn't necessarily mean like we've agreed to do it or anything like that, but like, you know, we should at least have a proposal, I think, in the repo, and then that implies at least we're considering it, and then we could like add it to the GitHub project and so on, create tickets for it. But before we merge it in, I feel like we need to resolve all the remaining threads on there. So like there was one that was like, please add this example, please add this link, etc. So if you have time to just get all those resolved, like the simple things, then we can at least land that PR, and then we can continue iterating on the proposal itself by like maybe new PRs against the proposal to like, you know, add new sections or change text or whatever else, if that works for you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I think feel like the biggest question raised on that was like, hey, but what about reentrancy? And I wish Bradley were here because I feel like he's the only one who can explain reentrancy, or at least the only one I've heard explain reentrancy. Can either of you explain what this is and why it's a concern?
I think yes. Or do you want to handle that, Meow?
So I think I see what reentrancy is, but I'm still not sure what's the problem myself. So if you can explain.
So at least for me, the concern is that if you have a series of things that are basically constantly changing the status of the world in series, and then they would need to basically like retroactively change something for a loader that came before. I think of that as what reentrancy, like the way that you would facilitate that is reentrancy. So like you kind of like you're going along, and then like the world changes, so you have to stop and go back and incorporate the change of that world into this process, and then it continues on, and then at some point the world needs to change again, and you go back and you start, and so you can have basically like this multiverse, like Marvel multiverse thing happening, and it becomes, I think, basically what's the term, non-deterministic. So like your inputs don't guarantee your outputs.
I think there are two different things. On one side, there is for me, reentrancy is mostly just calling a function itself. It's whether you're running a process and then you're restarting from the beginning, but that doesn't mean that you're aborting. That just means that you're yielding to call yourself in, basically a sort of recursion.
I think you do, well, you don't necessarily have to abort, but I think basically you putting, I don't know, a flag in the ground or something, and anything that would happen after that would be useless. So you would stop and then start again. Like you could continue on, but anything that happens after that point is just crap, like garbage.
It's like if a function kept running after the return statement or something like that.
Yeah.
But there are use cases to keep going after that. For example, let's say I was to implement JSON as, or let's say I was to implement a loader that was adding support for both JSON and JSON 5. I could call the next function with both a test to check whether the .json file resolves and another one that checks whether the .json without 5 results, and then pick one of the first of them that results, right? I'm not sure if I'm super clear.
I think that's not reentrancy. I think that's just a race. Because you're not putting it back into itself.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was just thinking when you were explaining this, is like the ambient loader proposal, I don't feel like necessarily is reentrancy. It's sort of like
It doesn't
sort of
have
like
to be.
right, like it strikes me as like really hard to implement in a way, because like right now when we sort of have the framework built already for chaining. We're just not supporting it yet. Like in that we have the node default hooks and then the custom hooks, and they're already like an array of now there's like an array of say 2 resolve hooks, an array of 2 load hooks, etc. And so expanding that array to multiple is fairly trivial. But expanding that array where it's almost like you can't just call one function and then call the next in a sequence like that, like the way we kind of were anticipating chaining to be now. It's like you have to, it turns it from calling one after another to be almost like recursion, where it's like you call the first one and then it has to like instantiate the next loader, and then it has to instantiate the next loader, you know, that type of thing. So it should be possible, but like I feel like it's just a lot.
I think that's
not trickier
necessarily what would happen. I think with normal loaders, let's call them lay loaders, I don't know, irregular loaders, that does not change. I think with ambient loaders, that's the only bit that changes. And the change that happens is conditional and contextual based on sort of what's happening in this upper cloud of things. And I think part of the problem is that when things are moved off thread, you'll basically have, I don't know, a cloud of your ambient loaders here and your cloud of ambient loaders over here on your different threads. And the cloud of ambient loaders over here and the A and B are not necessarily the same. So when and which thread a regular loader passes through is not guaranteed and is not controlled. So if your loader, if your thing is getting loaded by, say, A, you would get a different result than B. But you have no way to tell or force which one it goes through, and that is the danger. Because you basically have different instances of your ambient loaders up here, and they could, their path of reentrancy and all that sort of stuff does not necessarily have to be the same.
Why would it be different on different instances?
Sorry?
Why would it be different instances of those loaders?
Because it has to be.
Why?
You can't have the same instance of something shared across threads.
Yes, but why would there be multiple threads?
Because those multiple threads are handling the loaders.
One of the things that's been on the roadmap for a while is to move loaders in general off the main thread.
Yes, but would each loader live in its own thread, or would all loaders live in one thread that
like
is
one loader's thread?
So
I don't know.
I think
we'd have to figure that out when
you can have multiple. And I think we would probably in future, if you have, I don't know, shit tons of things happening, probably we would want to spawn multiple. And in that case, all ambient loaders would need to exist on all threads that are handling this. But then the individual loaders don't necessarily need to go to all of those threads. So it could be like something happens over here and then gets passed over here. But if A and B are not the same, then if it goes to A first and then to B, your result could be different than if it went from B and then to A.
That depends, because all those regular loaders could just yield to the same thread that has instantiated all the ambient loaders, right?
It could, but I think that would need to be in the design. Because if
I
it's
don't
not,
think,
then
because
that
it's
is
still
sort of undefined.
it's still something that seems very far in the future. Right now, the loaders are not even in a separate thread from the main one. So it seems
They're
a bit like
about to
jumping
be
the
very
shark
soon.
to describe this.
Well, I think we need to consider it because on our roadmap, the threading loaders is scheduled before ambient loaders. So that would need to be incorporated into the proposal as it would exist by the time this happens.
Yeah, but because we don't know exactly how this thread stuff would exist yet, it's hard. Like, I don't know how Mail could adjust the proposal to account for threading if we don't know what, the threading looks like,
I think we know at a minimum that there is at least more than one, because we would have at least the main thread and then the loaders thread, and potentially the loaders thread is a pool.
But that's different, because if there is a single thread for all loaders, then there is no problem at all, because all live in the same instance. So what you're saying is that this potential special case could exist only if there are one thread by loader, which is even one step further than just moving the loaders in the thread.
Yeah, but I think we need to consider it now, because if we don't, then we would potentially / very likely screw ourselves in future and then like code ourselves into a corner.
It sounds like more like it's a consideration for when we implement the thread work, not to implementing the ambient loaders work.
I think no, because the thread work doesn't care about this. Like how
Well, the thread work would be
happen.
done knowing that this is potentially coming.
But
That's my point.
As far as the threads are concerned, they don't care, and it's not their concern. Like, this is nothing that the thread stuff can handle. This sits on top of the threads.
Okay, let me ask a different question.
Sorry.
Why do we need two types of loaders? Like, why not just have it be like, if you have loaders A, B, and C, like if all three are ambient, like -- ambient loader A, ambient loader B, ambient loader C, and you don't need the other type of, like, you theoretically any loader could be an ambient loader, it seems like. So why not just make regular -- loader be this ambient loader behavior, where loader A affects the behavior of B, etc. And we still just have one type of loader. It just behaves like this, where one affects the next rather than them being more independent.
From my, if I remember right, Bradley mentioned that it was because he wanted to be able to have efficient loaders, and if there was something about having multiple thread one by loader, so something like Jacob was mentioning, and in that case, that would require to that would require to instantiate all the loaders in all the threads. But it's not a use case that is very clear to me either. So, but I think that was what you mentioned. I wrote about it in the proposal. The reason for that is an attempt to keep loaders as isolated as possible to allow follow-up improvements, like reusing them across workers. Oh, that was workers, yeah. Or scaling them up. If all loaders were influenced by prior loaders, they would effectively coalesce into a single one, which would prevent such work.
Yeah, and I think the reason that we, and also one of the reasons we wanted to separate them conceptually is because most, like the vast majority of loaders don't need the extra complexity that an this ambient loader thing could provide. And there's way more opportunity for a foot gun with the ambient loader stuff. So we were trying to kind of like save people from stuff that they almost surely don't need, but
One
also
question-
facilitating the people who do.
One question I have, those loaders that don't need that this complexity that you mentioned, aren't those the loaders that are actually only loaders, not resolvers?
Huh?
So
Sorry?
there are currently two different.
No, I mean, like
There's
if you look
the-
at the examples in the chaining design doc, like the unpackage example where it like rewrites, you know, import Lodash to import unpackage HTTPS unpackage.com/Lodash. Like that doesn't need to be ambient,
I mean,
but it also is a resolve hook.
It could, because then if you want to load a loader that is through HTTP, then
I mean, it could be ambient. There's nothing stopping it from being so, but it doesn't need to be. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, like as long as it happens like before other things that would depend on it, then it's fine. But I think the only
like almost
use
any
case-
loader could be ambient, I think, unless
Yeah.
there's some reason why it couldn't affect following loaders, that it would break following loaders. But
I think the only real use case where we would need the ambient loader is basically when one loader sort of needs to put its fingers in the pies of other loaders and directly manipulate how they behave rather than just control their inputs or affect their inputs. If I'm understanding the scenario that you have.
yeah, I mean, I feel like
provided for.
yeah, it's like the example he had of like resolving from inside of a zip file is definitely one. I could see another example where like you want an ambient, say an ambient TypeScript loader, so that the like say loader A is this TypeScript loader, loader B could be a loader written in TypeScript or or CoffeeScript, or name your whatever your language, and that way, as long as you put the TypeScript one first, all of the following loaders could also be written in TypeScript, etc. So
I
that's
think it would-
another case.
I think potentially another case would be when you need multiple things, like you have multiple dependency. In a chain, you can't really have that. So like, let's say, I don't know, A and B, sorry, C and C and B both depend on A. And so like you don't have like a funnel shaped dependency type thing. Does that make sense? So that would be a use case of an ambient loader. Let's say, I don't know, your loader, your subsequent loader is written in TypeScript, and also it's loaded over HTTPS, and also it's got like, I don't know, some zip stuff. And so in order to, and it itself has a dependency on something else. And in order to resolve all of these things, they all have to be able to access and interact with each other, and they can't merely just pass along. Or is that just
I kind of feel like the more ideal developer experience would be if we don't have two different types of loaders, we just have one. So maybe we just have the regular -- loader behave as ambient loaders. And then the question is it possible to just adopt this behavior where every loader affects the following one without breaking anything? Like it sounds like Bradley's concern with it would probably be a performance hit, which is fair. But I'm also kind of thinking like,
I don't think it was a performance. If I remember correctly, it was more memory usage. Because then each loader would have to be instantiated in each thread and have their own memory and their own cache.
Right, but so where I was going with this was that like, I think it seems pretty clear that we could have one thread for all loaders. Like you don't have to put each loader in a separate thread, I would think. Because we don't have that yet. Like they're all on the main thread right now. And we already essentially have a chain of 2 loaders on the main thread. So even moving them off thread doesn't necessarily mean you have to move each loader to its own thread. Like you could just have a loaders thread with all the loaders on that one thread, I would hope. And then if you do that, then they could behave however we want, I think. And what I'm thinking is like having the loaders together in the same thread is probably a more desirable developer experience than having developers needing to worry about how to communicate from one loader to the next across threads. Like for them, it just feels like it does now where they're all together in the same like global namespace. But what we lose is the performance that all the loaders would be running on the same thread. Now, what I'm thinking is that like, there's only like one use case for loaders in production, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and that use case is monitoring. So like New Relic or Datadog or one of those types of things like that you might want to run in production. So what it could be that like there's no, if you only have one loader, it doesn't matter, or it's the same thing as each loader being in their own thread or all loaders being in a loaders thread because there's only one loader. Now, and if you have
loader.
I'm sorry?
PNP will be a production loader. Yarn play, plug and play.
Sure. Well, what I was going to say though is like the other thing I was thinking was like, say you wanted to have 2 monitoring systems in place. If you were concerned about the performance hit about having them, on the same thread or whatever, then I think what you could do is just use some kind of build tool to merge them together. Like the Webpack for loaders somehow generates a single loader from, Datadog and New Relic and PMP, somehow. And even maybe within this loader, it itself spawns worker threads or something like that to get work off the main thread, but that's at least like Node wouldn't be handling it. That would be the responsibility of this build output loader to handle its own performance concerns. You know what I mean?
If we had those monitor type things as ambient loaders, would it create a likely scenario of these monitors monitoring each other inadvertently and like,
well, you would probably
locking
want
each other
that
out?
No, I mean, you want that. You want the monitor to track all loaded code, like if it, like say you have 2 loaders, like Datadog and PMP, you'd probably load them in that order so that if the PMP loader throws an error, the Datadog loader catches it and reports it back to the Datadog dashboard. You know what I mean? You don't want the Datadog loader to be ignorant of all the other loaders that follow it,
No, sorry, monitors. Let's say I've got, I don't know, a new relic. I don't know what the difference between these things are. I don't know what they do. But let's say you've got a new relic one that does something specific and another one that like Datadog that does some other kind of specific monitoring. If they were both ambient and sort of watching each other, would they get into a live lock where one is watching the other and waiting for it to finish, and then the other is watching the first, waiting for it to finish, and they never
well,
do because they're watching
the
each other.
second one could never watch the first.
It's an
It's
ambient
like
loader. It could.
I don't think so. It only would affect the ones following it.
I think they would need to go back. And this is the reentrancy problem we were talking about, no?
I don't see how they
wouldn't
could.
be able to.
Hmm?
They wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
That's why you kind of have to choose. Like, I mean, I think nowadays both New Relic and Datadog do lots of things, but I think like when they first started, Datadog was focused on logs and New Relic was focused on like errors and performance, like, oh, you have high CPU and things like that. So you would, you could have like say that's all they did for simplicity's sake, for argument. So you would say put Datadog first to capture all logs or all error logs, say, even logs generated by New Relic. And then you put New Relic second, and then it captures CPU spikes and memory spikes and whatever else. But if there was an error thrown by Datadog, New Relic would never be able to notice it. Or if Datadog's loader itself caused a CPU spike, then if Datadog's loader caused a memory spike, New Relic's one wouldn't be able to catch it because New Relic's would be second, or vice versa, depending on like what you want to be first. And then if that's a problem, then it's kind of on users to, somehow merge these together in user land so that there's one loader that does both the Datadog and New Relic stuff together. And that's not a problem for us to solve, I don't think.
I thought that's part of what Ambient Loader was trying to solve, because you're saying, Miel, that and I agreed with this, that loaders should not be aware of each other. And unless we have like an army that is like creating these wrappers for, say, Datadog and New Relic, that wrapper has knowledge of how those two things work. But that would be terribly impractical.
I'm not sure.
Am I misremembering this?
I thought the proposal was that each ambient loader would only affect the successive ones.
Yeah.
Not that they would affect the preceding ones.
Oh, okay then. Sorry.
I mean, correct me if I misread it. Like, but I thought it was like if you had A, B, and C, when B executes, it's affected by whatever was registered in A. And then when C executes, it's affected by whatever is registered by A and B. But that's it. Like A is never affected by B or C.
I thought you had said, Miel, that you'd need a zip ambient loader or something and your PNP ambient loader, and that they needed to be able to affect each other. No?
I
Am I
don't
imagining
know.
this?
No, I need to have the zip loader, the PNP loader that specifies where to sorry, where to load the dependencies, and I need a zip loader to fetch them. But apart from that, no. However, one thing that will probably be needed will be to be able to call the resolution from the beginning.
So yes, that sounds like that would boot it back.
Yes.
Like it would start over and change the input of the whole thing.
That's for a different use case that's not related to the ambient loader. But that's something that even, I mean, loaders will need to do, because that's a regular concern. To give you some idea, in Yarn, we have a plugin system, and we have two ways of handling that. Either you're calling the next loader, or you're calling the first one. You don't know what are the one before you, but you know that you can't call from the beginning. And that's very important, because otherwise it means that you have no way to resume the resolution from the viewpoint of the user. And let's say that
might be
for example, to give you an idea, let's say that I'm trying to make a resolution of I don't know, a JSON file or anything. I might need to make to do other resolution before. And if I'm doing other resolution in order to derive the resolution that I need to make for the primary request, then I need to do it from the beginning. Otherwise, I will skip all those that were before me. So it has to be.
That's more of like a chaining concern that maybe once we get the first pass of chaining done, having some way, like we have next right now, having some way of calling not just the next loader, but the first loader might be something we would potentially add. I could see how that could be useful.
Yeah. In essence, it's like being able to call import.meta.resolve from within a loader.
That's what I was just thinking of. That was exactly what it reminded me of.
And
I mean, but that feels like its own separate concern, not related necessarily to ambient loaders.
yeah, totally. And
Okay.
and also another thing, I think this reentrancy thing is also a matter of how the loaders are written. So if they have side effects, then yes, it might get a bit dicey. But a loader is not supposed, a resolver at least, is not supposed to have a side effect. At best, it's supposed to cache things so that they are not recomputed, but that's really at best. But they are not supposed to affect the world. So if they do, it's also a problem in the user-learned code, and that's not maybe not something that we can really protect against.
But didn't ambient loaders want to be able to do that?
No, ambient loader are separate thing. I think they are not related to reentrancy. It's just something that is need. It's just something that in general in the loader team, I don't think that we should prevent reentrancy because it will be important when writing loaders. Because I feel like reentrancy is always a subject in all the topic I open.
Well, I mean, you should maybe make a separate issue just for it that not only explains what it is, because I feel like there's a lack of full understanding of it, but also of the use case, like you're saying, and especially if you can have a example from somewhere else of where it's implemented successfully and doesn't cause like the world to catch on fire. That would be good, like a reentrancy primer for everybody. One thing I was thinking, sure. One thing I was thinking of too is that the ESM package written by John David Dalton. I remember like looking at its source code years ago to try to see how is it doing what it's doing, and it's essentially a CommonJS loader, and it has a dependency. I want to say it was called like Pirates or something, or Pirate, that essentially, because like CommonJS loaders are very much like affects the world type of thing. Like you add something to require.extensions, it affects every CommonJS resolution like in your app, including all dependencies. So there was some dependency called Pirate or something like that, where it would make sure that the ESM package only affected, I think, your app and not your dependencies. And also it somehow, if you had other stuff registered, like if you had the TypeScript loader as well as the ESM loader both registered in CommonJS world, the ESM loader would only affect stuff that wasn't handled by the TypeScript loader. So like basically, in other words, like the CommonJS, like, not that there is really a loaders API for CommonJS, but like the APIs that people were hijacking to kind of do similar things in CommonJS were inherently the ambient loader behavior, like by default. And so this Pirate library was trying to stop that behavior, was to try to like make it be separated for packages that needed it to be so, like ESM. So that's something you might want to look at, because it's like, or we all should probably look at or understand, because like, what are the use cases? Like, there's probably a good use case, say, for having a loader that only affects first-party code, that never, like, once that package boundary is crossed into like the node modules folder and then farther down, that we never want our loader to affect any of that stuff, for example,
so
that might be something that we want to like investigate or understand better,
I will have to bounce soon. So what would be the next action item for the RFC?
So let's at least get that proposal cleaned up and merged, just the resolve all the things and then we can merge that in. If you have time to write a separate thing about like resolve from start or reentrancy, I would really appreciate it. Like even that, whatever that form may take, like just an issue on the repo or another document to into the design docs or something, or a proposal. Any of that would be fine. I don't know if it needs to necessarily be done as part of merging the proposal in, but just like a discussion somewhere, maybe a separate issue or something like that, where we talk about like, well, why shouldn't all loaders just be ambient loaders? Like, what would be the pluses and minuses of taking that approach? I think that's it. Am I missing something?
Don't think so. I just did a quick scan through, and the open threads in the proposal don't seem to be related to like the proposal itself. Like,
Well, it's
is the
just like
proposal good?
they're just like ways to improve the proposal itself to be a better proposal. Like, oh, add this other example, which I feel like should be trivial to do. But like actually debating the proposal itself and how the proposal should be, we could do as follow-ups, I feel like.
Yeah.
Does that sound good to you, Mayal? Am I missing anything?
Yeah, sure. I will make a commit with fixes in the proposal, then we can merge it. Regarding the reentrancy thing, so again, I'm not myself seeing the problem, so I can explain how I could see it being used, but I will not be able to explain why it will be a problem. That's something that
I think that's fine. I think
start
start with the use case and the feature request, and someone will point out what the problem is, and then we can go from there. We can figure out like, okay, so is there some way to address this concern about whatever threads, performance, whatever it is, or maybe the use case is more important. Like maybe this use case is like something we really want to support, and so therefore we never move loaders off thread, or we move them off thread, but always to just one thread. I think that's worth discussing and debating.
Okay, we'll do that then.
Cool, thank you. All right, I'm going to add these to the document before I forget, and feel free to add anything else I've forgotten to the Google Doc. Let me share the link to it. Yeah, any notes you can remember, please feel free. And yeah, I'd love to get that merged in as soon as it's ready. And then we can go from there. Like I feel like we have to implement chaining and maybe even threads before that. So it's like a ways off, but we can at least get the proposal and design as nailed down as possible. And if you can help with any of the precursors.
Do you see it as being something that I could implement in the meantime?
Sorry, what do you mean?
I mean, doesn't it rely on chaining? Like the whole point is like one loader affects the next. So therefore we need to support multiple loaders first, right?
Yeah, probably.
I mean, maybe we don't need to do the thread work, but I think we at least need to get chaining. If you can help on that, I mean, I would just coordinate with Jacob because I think he was, I don't know if he already started on it or was going to start on it. So, just make sure we're not duplicating effort, but by all means, you'd love for help. So we've been talking about chaining for months and not writing any code for it. So nothing against Jacob there, but I think if you have bandwidth, by all means, we would appreciate it. So.
Yeah, chaining was just blocked by some PRs, which have now landed. So I think we're good to go.
Okay.
Coolio.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.